This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick update as far as the markets are concerned. So as far as the week is concerned, Nigerian equities basically ending the week just under 1.5% higher, but they're still essentially in negative territory on a year-to-date basis, down around 5.1%. The JSE All Share in South Africa that's closing the week basically where essentially it started, but it does have one of the biggest gains that we have of all the bourses we track here, over 11% so far in the year. DD Global shares not having exactly a positive start to the trading sessions across the Atlantic in the United States, down around 8% today after news emerged from China of a probe into their cybersecurity policies and systems. Here's what's coming up tonight. OPEC Plus ministers are set to thrash out the details of a crude production deal. African housing ministers look for ways to develop affordable housing on the continent. And over 100 countries agree to a global minimum corporate income tax rate of 15%. All that and more is in the pipeline for you tonight. Tonight's program will be very heavily focused on energy, at least in the first 30 minutes or so. Our starting point is on oil. OPEC Plus members reconvened on Friday to decide the next phase of their production policy. This Middle East-dominated producer group met on Thursday via video link to add at least 2 million barrels of crude per day of production to the market between August and the month of December. Now, the deal was thrown into disarray at the last minute after the United Arab Emirates blocked the move. Oil prices moved on the news, rising slightly on Thursday before losing momentum in today's trading session, as you'll see the prices a little later. Brent crude futures were at around 75.45 a barrel, down half percentage point for the session. US WTI, West Texas Intermediate futures were around 74.89, around 0.4% lower. Now, OPEC Plus had agreed to implement significant crude production cuts in 2020 when the pandemic coincided with a historic fuel demand shock. Analysts now expect oil demands to gather pace in the second half of the year. In the meantime, retail fuel prices in Ghana have gone up. The increases are mainly linked to changes with global markets, but they could also feed through to inflation in other sectors of Ghana's economy. As CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai now reports.
Filling up in Ghana has become an expensive activity. Motorists are feeling the pinch after the latest rise in the cost of petrol and diesel, which has already gone up several times this year.
I run on Uber. I'm a public service person, and the fuel is really affecting us. We are not getting anything out of what we do.
We drivers, we are suffering.
I had to increase the cost of hiring my truck due to the increment in fuel prices, but people are complaining it's expensive and don't want to hire the truck.
A litre of petrol is now selling at $1.07, up from 81 cents in January. Analysts attribute the hike to depreciation of the local currency, the cedi, against the US dollar, the fluctuation in global fuel prices, and taxes introduced by the government.
The increase in fuel prices is already trickling down to other sectors of the economy. In this market, the cost of groceries has also shot up.
Analysts say the higher cost of fuel could slow down the country's economic recovery.
It's going to be difficult. Once we see some of these prices going up, businesses can get to even fold up because then maybe their cost of doing business also goes up. And in that case, then you have the negative rippling effect affecting the household, salary slashed, or maybe people laid off at the end of the day. So I think these are the negative change that happens when we see fuel prices going up.
Energy experts say the cost of fuel could continue to go up if the government doesn't step in.
In the immediate circumstance, today, tomorrow, go and reduce the taxes. Because world market prices cannot be going up. And you are also collecting everything from us at the same time. That's a double slap. Once you are able to reduce the taxes, then you can come and look at the short to medium. Get the refinery to work.
For now, though, The government is not considering a reduction in taxes on petroleum products, so the road ahead for consumers could remain a costly one. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
South Sudan's government is calling on more investors to put capital into the country's oil sector. South Sudan recently launched its first ever oil licensing auction. It's put up 5 blocks on offer. As CGTN's Patrick Oyet now explores, the landlocked nation is looking to get its staple oil sector back on track after years of insecurity and civil war after it split from Sudan in 2011.
The Ministry of Petroleum says the oil licensing round aims to attract interest from a diverse group of investors. The ministry says it has identified new exploration blocks with potential petroleum. It says it has compiled crucial data to provide to interested investors.
The government of South Sudan continue to put in place the relevant framework, policies, guidelines, and management system that create conducive environment for all business owners as it embarked on a journey to build the nation.
South Sudan's petroleum ministry says about 90% of the country's oil and gas reserves remain unexplored. Some South Sudanese companies are expressing interest in investing in the petroleum sector.
We are working on this licensing rounds project, and if we get an opportunity, we'll show the government as well as the citizen of the country how this thing is done. Because if we do it correctly, then you'll see the benefit of the resources.
One challenge that many local companies in South Sudan face is lack of financial facilities such as loans. However, that might soon change.
We believe that ensuring a strong financial services sector and the oil and gas sector is key to supporting local content, economic growth, and Stanbic Bank South Sudan is invested in various products to provide new solutions to local businesses like never seen before.
The oil sector is being blamed for pollution in the country. Some civil society groups in South Sudan are expressing their concern over the issue.
Whatever they do as local content should also look into environmental protection issues, because there's been a lot of environmental damages in the oil sector. There's been a lot of environmental damages within the energy sector. And that needs to be taken on board.
The Petroleum Ministry says it will carry out an environmental audit and has pledged to protect the environment. The current blocks available for exploration range between 4,000 and 25,000 square kilometers. The oil companies operating in South Sudan include China National Petroleum Corporation, India's Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, Nigeria's Oranto, and Malaysia's Petronas. But South Sudan's government says there are still more opportunities in the oil sector for other investors from other countries. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
All right, then, we've focused on crude oil, but what about something that's trying to replace it? Rolls-Royce is expanding its power systems business across the continent through a combination of share acquisitions and power firms across Africa, even as it pitches its small modular nuclear reactor business to countries interested in expanding access to low-carbon electricity. Rolls-Royce has invested an undisclosed sum in Kauri Energy, a startup that will provide distributed power solutions through solar PV and battery storage systems. The firm will roll out operations in Nigeria and Mali later this year, with power plants up to 1 megawatt in size. A few hours ago, I spoke to Patrick Regis, his Rolls-Royce president for business in Africa, the Middle East, Turkey and Central Asia. I started by asking him why we should expect to see more deals of this kind from the firm.
We've really looked at how we deliver energy and power generation in a different way in recent years, really looking at changing the culture inside the company and thinking more entrepreneurial. And so Kauri Energy is a product essentially of that kind of thinking. Less big acquisitions and big investments, more tailored, focused investments in areas that are important to us.
Anyone watching this will ask, wait a minute, what on earth is sustainable aviation fuels? Because, reading about this entire topic, you hear about how we need to move towards synthetic fuels. This has been around for a while. Our South African viewers will know this because Sasol does some interesting work on that front in the country.
Exactly.
But when we talk about synthetic fuels coming into the market, how do they compare to the traditional fuels that we know about, especially with respect to their carbon footprint?
That's a good question, and I don't want to get too much into the engineering of this, but synthetic fuels are, you're right to say they've been around for years, actually, I think the mid-1920s. They are aircraft fuels with significantly reduced carbon emissions when you compare them to Jet A fuel. They can be derived from a variety of different ways, feedstocks, including biomass, waste, or organic material, converted into usable products using a conversion process. What we're focusing on is e-fuels. So that's e-fuels, they differ from synthetic aviation fuels in that they're manufactured directly from carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide, combined with low carbon hydrogen. And so the term e-fuels is widely used. It covers aviation fuel as well as traditional fuel non-aviation.
And the process of creating the synthetic fuels is very energy intensive. And as I understand it, the pitch you're making is that, look, we can deliver e-fuels on one hand, but to do that, we can also provide these small modular reactors that will essentially provide the stable power in large quantities that you need to develop those e-fuels.
Yeah, and I think you've obviously you've been doing your homework, because synthetic, small modular reactors is something we're absolutely passionate about as a business. And we think that for Africa, it's a perfect system offering to resolve a lot of the electrification concerns in a sustainable way. We think of nuclear in a negative way often, but actually we've been in the nuclear business for over 60 years, designing small nuclear power stations for nuclear submarines for the Royal Navy. And one day we decided to look at the civil nuclear industry, and we saw that these big nuclear power plants were in a budget overrun mode, taking too long to build. And we said, why don't we just kind of use our knowledge with our 2,000 nuclear engineers on board and start thinking about a small, compact nuclear power station. And the thing that's really important here, Ramah, is that we're not talking, as a lot of our competitors are talking about, simply the nuclear reactor portion. No, that's de-risked. We're using PWR technology that is well understood. We can replace it with new technology later. What's important is the fact that we have a power station that is built around modularity, built in a shop, manufactured, standard, and can be delivered at low cost.
But anyone watching this, Patrick, will say, okay, that on paper sounds interesting, but when it comes down to it, if, say, for example, let's say Kenya, right, their plan is to essentially have at least 1,000 megawatts of nuclear power at some point to start with. For that sort of power demand, how much would it cost them? And more importantly, can it compete in a world where geothermal is delivering power to the grid at 9 US cents to the dollar per 9 US cents per kilowatt hour?
Well, again, it's a great question. Look, we're not here to compete with other energy sources. The challenge is so big that there's enough room for everybody. There's enough room for intermittent, because that's what it is, solar, wind, and I would say the classic renewables solutions.
I know you as Rolls-Royce, that is, you've put in a pitch on the latest RFI from South Africa's Department of Energy and Mineral Resources. But are there other African markets that you're particularly keen on who have expressed an interest in the uptake of these SMRs? I
think Kenya is interested in it. And look, we know that other countries are approaching African countries directly. We are speaking with, just starting a discussion with Kenya, certainly with South Africa, quite mature. We know Nigeria would be interested in, perhaps in North Africa, but we're focusing on sub-Saharan Africa.
All right, then a quick run through some company headlines. Let's start in the world of aviation. The UAV delivery startup Zipline has raised $250 million in new funding. Its latest round effectively vaulted the company's valuation to $2.75 billion. It'll further fuel its expansion of its logistics networks in African countries, including Ghana and Rwanda and the US. Zipline made a name for itself first in Rwanda, then later on in Ghana, where it was delivering blood, vaccines, life-saving medications and other essential supplies using autonomous electric drones. Facebook has announced the launch of Reels ads in 25 African countries, with a short video making feature is now live. Reel ads will enable businesses on Instagram to reach a much wider range of audiences, besides allowing people to discover new content from brands and creators. Prior to this, Reel ads was successfully tested in a range of countries around the world. Comair, which operates British Airways and Kulula in South Africa, is temporarily suspending all scheduled flights for 3 weeks. The airline announced on the 2nd of July that it would suspend all flights on Monday, the 5th of July 2021. It aims to restart services on the 30th of July. That decision follows President Cyril Ramaphosa's announcement of a move to an adjusted level 4 lockdown and the prohibition of all non-essential travel into and out of Gauteng. And Mitsubishi Electric CEOs has announced that he will be stepping down after the company revealed it had falsified inspection data stretching back more than 3 decades for air conditioners and brake compressors used in trains. Takeshi Sugiyama became CEO back in 2018, and he's been with Mitsubishi for more than 4 decades. The admission by Mitsubishi further dents Japan's reputation for high-quality manufacturing, already tarnished in other cases by other cases of companies falsifying or covering up test data. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. African housing ministers are looking for ways to develop affordable housing on the continent. And the COVID-19 pandemic is spurring the rise of tech healthcare firms across the continent.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Housing ministers from across the continent have designed a 40-year plan of action to invest in affordable housing initiatives across the continent. Now, that resolution was made at the end of the Shelter Afrique General Assembly in the city of Yaoundé in Cameroon. Those at the 4-day event agreed to enhance mechanisms for the mass production of decent and affordable housing in the continent. They also agreed to set up mechanisms to make it a lot easier to provide cheaper, long-term sources of funding. Most African countries are still struggling to deal with the housing crisis. The housing supply deficit in Nigeria, for example, is estimated at 17 million units. Africa's largest oil producer has just over 535,000 mortgage accounts. That's less than a third of the total in South Africa, which has a population a third the size of Nigeria's. So let's explore this topic in a bit more detail. Jonathan Ofei answers, the publisher at Africa Briefing magazine. He joins us on the program from London. Thank you for your time this evening, sir. So when we speak of housing, Access to affordable financing is often cited as one key problem. Nigeria, for instance, population of nearly 200 million, just under 535,000 mortgage accounts. But is this the right way to think about the financing problem? Is mortgage scarcity really an accurate reflection of the financing problem?
Yes, it is a very accurate reflection of the problem, because most, the majority of Africans, are low income, belong to low income families. Okay, and those who can afford mortgages are those in the middle income and upwards group. So when it comes to mortgage affordability of outright housing, it becomes a big problem for most Africans. So I believe the governments need to formulate good policies to provide affordable housing for the mass majority of the people, especially those in the urban areas.
Yeah, we've seen in some instances countries like Kenya, for example, providing mortgage refinancing facilities to try and lower the cost of these debt facilities. Do we need to see a lot more of that across Africa?
Yes, we need to see a lot more, but number one, how does the average African, the average worker, assess a mortgage from a bank or a mortgage broker or from a housing company? It is difficult. I mean, there are so many factors that prohibit the majority of Africans from accessing mortgages to own their own homes. So I mean, the problems are myriad that the governments in Africa need to sit down, examine the problem, and find the right solutions to suit everybody.
To what extent, though, might building standards also be part of the problem? Because if we're saying that we want to expand accessibility to housing, but then at the same time we say that a house, by definition, by law, must be something built, say, out of concrete and bricks, materials that may essentially be out of reach for many people, aren't we just making it more difficult, making this affordable housing dream essentially a mirage?
That's a good question. Look, I mean, when we talk about housing, I mean, Africans or governments need to be very innovative. To own a house, to build a house, you don't necessarily, like you said, it shouldn't be built from bricks or mortar or concrete or whatever. There are new innovations coming up that African governments, African businesses, African housing companies need to assess and harness to be able to. I mean, I read about 20 years ago, someone went to Ghana, where I come from originally, using laterite, to build houses. Laterite without much cement, with a little cement component to build houses. And the laterite, when it's used, I mean, laterite is very common and very cheap in Africa. So laterite, when it's used, to build a house, you wouldn't even need air conditioners, in those buildings. So these are some of the innovative things that African governments, housing companies need to look at and explore to the benefit of the majority of Africa.
All right, one last question for you, sir. So to what extent is affordable access to land just as much a barrier to getting as many people into affordable homes?
Land is a problem. I mean, let me use Ghana, where I come from, my country. I mean, the land tenure system is a bit cumbersome, for lack of a better way. Okay, and look, when you go to the Ghana capital, Accra, there are so many instances where a plot of land could be sold to multiple people. Okay. In Accra, in Ghana, we have something called the land guards, whose sole purpose is to guard lands from being encroached and so on and so forth. So again, governments need to come up with the right policies, to make sure that number one, the traditionally owned lands owned by the traditional authorities, are made more accessible. Again, lands owned by the government are also well demarcated well processed, and to be made accessible to people, so that land is not, one piece of land is not sold to multiple people, so on and so forth.
Indeed, quite a bit of work to be done as far as cracking that affordable housing problem is concerned. Thank you for your time this evening, Jonathan Ofei-Anter, publisher at the Africa Briefing magazine. Now then, let's focus on healthcare. Healthcare-focused tech firms are springing up right across sub-Saharan Africa, especially after the coronavirus pandemic highlighted some critical gaps in the continent's medical supplies chain. More than 60 new and existing private firms are now distributing health products to consumers and to hospitals with tech platforms up and down the continent. From Kampala, CGTN's Leon Sanyange now explores how medical call centers and social media platforms are helping patients in Uganda.
Letitia Iguma has been under lockdown. She spends most of her time at home. That's left her worrying about how she'd access a doctor if she needed a checkup.
Right now, there's so much that's going on, and more we are getting away from physical contact. And so, apart from the cases where we really need to get to a doctor physically, I think for these other cases, we should be able to embrace this new technology.
That's where telemedicine is increasingly stepping in.
Hello, this is Dr. Pamela from Rocket Health.
The service helps patients contact medical personnel who can immediately diagnose and recommend treatment through telephone calls or messages on internet platforms and apps.
Telemedicine is a different module of healthcare delivery. So for it bases on the fact that patients can get healthcare services remotely. So that means that they don't need to be in the same place as the doctors.
This private health service has seen a huge increase in clients over the past year. That's partly been because of the growth of medical insurance schemes in the country. The doctors here receive hundreds of calls every day. The interaction with patients has mostly been on COVID-19 related issues. Moving away from the face-to-face consultations, the doctors say is keeping them and their patients safe. Telemedicine is a major shift in Uganda's healthcare service. According to the World Health Organization statistics, there is one doctor for every 25,000 patients in Uganda. It's a gap the technology could potentially reduce. And it could also lead to cheaper access to health services for patients.
Routinely, people would get medical consultations at physical clinic at prices above $25,000 or $6 to $10. What we've done is through our teleconsultations, people can get consultations with a doctor for as low as $3 and sometimes even cheaper. And this is from the comfort of your home. So more people have been able to access a doctor, which they would not be able to do previously.
But roadblocks exist for online-based services. Uganda recently imposed the 12% tax on internet data, making access more costly.
It means that fewer people may be able to benefit from technology-enabled or internet-enabled healthcare services, which is a shame. Also, there's the challenge of internet connectivity. That is improving over time. However, there are still also regions and parts of countries where you do not have stable broadband or other internet connectivity, which allows for things like telemedicine.
But as more people get online in Uganda, combined with the restrictions due to the pandemic, telemedicine is likely to play an important role in the country's future healthcare provisions. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Nigerian lawmakers have passed a bill that overhauls nearly every aspect of the country's oil and gas production. The petroleum industry bill has been in the works for, and I'm not kidding when I say this, 2 decades. It was first introduced back in 2008. Now, legislators have been thrashing out the details of the bill ever since President Muhammadu Buhari presented an initial version of this in September last year. As CGTN's Deji Badmus now reports, the bill is expected to completely change how energy projects in Africa's biggest oil producer are operated and funded.
The Petroleum Industry Bill, or PIB for short, was first introduced in the Nigerian parliament in 2008. But political intrigues, deep division among players in the oil and gas industry, as well as disagreements from host communities, meant the bill could not be passed until now. Lawmakers in both the House of Representatives and the Senate had given themselves a June deadline to pass the bill. They missed that deadline by only 1 day.
A bill for an act to provide legal governance, regulatory and fiscal framework for the Nigerian petroleum industry, the development of host communities, and for related matters 2021 third reading taken, and the bill is passed. Well, distinguished colleagues, let me thank all of us for this tremendous and historical achievement of passing the long-awaited petroleum industry bill. This National Assembly has achieved one of its fundamental items on the legislative agenda. What we are expecting from the executive side of government is we are expecting a presidential signature.
I understand we cannot get the 10%, Mr. President. I understand that. But that is a clamor at home.
One of the contentious aspects of the bill is how much should go to host communities who bear the brunt of pollution and environmental degradation as a result of exploration activities. While the host communities had insisted on 10% of the operating cost of oil companies, the Senate eventually approved 3%, while the House of Representatives approved 5%.
Now, we need to encourage investors to come in. So the more people come to invest, the more you get 3%. But if you leave it at 5%, maybe 10 investors will come. If you bring it down to 3%, maybe 20 investors will come. So we expect a lot of investors to come in, and then a lot of this 3% will translate into even higher volume than we are expecting.
Industry players had long blamed the non-passage of the PIB for the low investments in Nigeria's oil and gas sector. With the passage of the bill, lawmakers are confident that will change.
So if you don't provide the incentives for the investors to come in, they will go to other places. And that is what has been happening. We've not had any major investment in the oil and gas sector in the last couple of years. With this bill, it's expected that these investments will come.
Both chambers of parliament will now have to sit down and harmonize their recommendations on the bill before passing it on to the president for his assent. So the last may just not have been heard on that contentious issue of how much should go to the host communities. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Let's get back to the business of energy production. With the cost of wind and solar energy, especially feeding into the grid, the cost of investing in it as well, all of these are falling dramatically. So on paper, it should be a lot easier to connect the over 600 million Africans who are not yet connected to the grid, right? Not quite. It's not that simple. As we heard a little earlier in the hour, there's no shortage of companies around the world that are keen to expand electricity supply across Africa. But the cost of universal access may be prohibitive. In Uganda's case, delivering universal electricity access will cost the country an estimated $7 billion. That's 20% of Uganda's pre-pandemic GDP. The country's main transmission and distribution firm, Umeme, believes it can lower that cost by nearly a third if distributed mini-grids instead are used. A few hours ago, I spoke to Umeme's CEO, Celestino Babungi. I started by asking him why it's so expensive to get Ugandan households plugged in to the grid.
And the grid is still young in Uganda. As you can imagine, only 250,000 consumers are connected to the grid. So to expand the grid to reach all these rural areas is costly, and that's why every connection costs you around $1,400. And it's estimated that to reach universal access, we need $7 billion if we have to go through the grid.
Okay, so the cost is slightly lower, but does that then translate to a much lower cost at the retail side to the consumer as well?
Yes, when you use the alternative sources of energy, I mean, when you look at it, you ask yourself, do people need energy? The answer is yes. If you look in Uganda, telephone companies, you have over 23 million telephones. If you look currently, people want to watch television, they want to have their radios on, they need appliances that use energy to drive economic development. So the question is, you need to take affordable solutions to them that will enable them translate that into economic returns, and then that improves their livelihood. What we have observed so far is that when you take the rooftop solutions, mini-grid solutions, And for example, appliance financing, where they are paying the capital cost for the equipment over a longer period, you achieve faster access than waiting for the grid that takes ages to reach them.
What's the retail cost of electricity on the mini grids compared to the national grid?
On the mini grid, you would say you first look at three options. If people did not have power, what's the cost? The cost is much, much higher. On mini grid, for example, the solution which you have implemented in central Uganda, this mini grid, we're looking at an average cost of 20 US cents. On the grid, the average cost is 17 US cents. So the comparatives are not significant, given that you have taken advantage of some capabilities, systems, and other costs that would be borne outside the grid system, which again drives to this need for an integrated solution to leverage on the capabilities of the main grid equipment and systems.
Plus also there's a health benefits that we're not talking about, because essentially with giving people access to electricity through these mini grids, you're also looking at these other benefits that come through from displacing use of, say, kerosene, for example, or other biofuels like firewood and charcoal as well.
Yes, we are seeing that, and already in the area we had already connected over 200 consumers in that, again providing them with appliance financing. We saw them taking advantage of that.
At the moment, the sector regulator decides what the power tariff should be over a certain period of time for grid-connected electricity. But as mini-grids become more and more prevalent in Uganda, do they come under the EPRA tariff regime, or do they need some sort of special different price mechanism?
Yeah, anything currently that is below 1 megawatts, you don't need the regulator intervention. However, we are seeing the regulator picking interest in this, but also from a policy perspective, the Ministry of Energy. We know mini grids can run as high as 35 cents per kilowatt hour outside the footprint. But for us, what we see is, what's much more important is deliver the mini grid to leverage on your cost, put in equipment that can actually actively use that power to reduce the cost of generating this power. And actually consumers, if you compare, they would prefer to pay a higher price in the short term as they improve their well-being.
Next door in Kenya, we have at least 100 operational mini-grids that are either operating or essentially eyeing the process of being constructed and put up at the moment. What do you think the total addressable market for mini-grids in Uganda is like at the moment?
At the moment, there was an estimate of around 400 mini-grids in the electrification plan, given the expansive nature of how Ugandans live sparsely from each other. So the estimate is 400 over the next 10 years, combining that with the solar home systems and also the expansion of the grid.
400 mini-grids and a $4 billion opportunity. Now, the Association of Economic Cooperation with African States and the South African United Business Confederation, they've signed a memorandum of understanding to promote Russia-South Africa economic relations. This particular body was created under the auspices of the Russian presidency after the Russia-Africa summit in Sochi in 2019. The partnership seeks to find new points of growth and to strengthen existing cooperation in trade, investment, tourism and agriculture, as CGTN's Yolisa Njamela now explains.
The South African United Business Confederation comprises South African representative companies, industrial associations and regional joint economic organizations, while the Association of Economic Cooperation with the African States promotes Russian business on the African continent. The two associations have signed a memorandum of understanding to enhance relations between South African and Russian businesses.
The signing of the MOU symbolizes a new phase in the relations between the two countries, and South Africa as an important partner for Russia and a participant in the merging of the world order. There is no better time than now, even though we have these challenges of the COVID-19, but we know that Russia, for example, has developed its own vaccine, which is a Sputnik, which currently our own regulatory, health regulatory SOE is busy looking at approving Sputnik as one of the vaccine to be utilized in this country.
The MOU will ensure further cooperation in trade, investments, imports and exports, tourism and agriculture between South Africa and Russia.
The MOU will create a enhance business opportunities through activities such as the trade desk, the exhibitions, the conferences, other networking events, and furthermore, access to technology and many other platforms we will unlock as we continue.
I'm convinced that it will serve as a basis for further strengthening of not only Russian South African ties, but those between Russia and African continent as a whole, which is in line with the provision of the declaration of the first Russia-Africa summit in Sochi, in particular, the intention to support Russian and African entrepreneurs in exploring ways of mutually beneficial cooperation.
This is important for us, and we will be glad to join all the opportunities. And we know, for example, how women in business are important in Africa. It is also so here in Russia. So definitely there are a lot of things that just, of similar importance that we will be glad to follow. And of course, employment is a very important issue here in Russia as well. And bringing this business between our countries, this will create new jobs, definitely.
According to the International Relations Department, bilateral relations between South Africa and Russia are at optimal level and continue to grow from strength to strength. Yuli Sanjamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
We're 40 minutes into the hour, time for another break. Here's what's coming up next. Over 100 countries agree on a global minimum corporate income tax rate at 15%. And Mobile World Congress enters its third day in Barcelona.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's dive into the world of taxes. A total of 130 countries, representing roughly 90% of global GDP, have agreed to a global minimum corporate income tax rate of 15%. That consensus was arrived at after 2 days of talks hosted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD as it's more commonly known. Now, the new tax regime is forecast to add at least $150 billion to government coffers around the world if it comes into force, which the OECD hopes will be in 2023. But major tax havens, including Ireland and some Caribbean nations, have not signed on to the deal, potentially weakening the effectiveness of this plan to quash the shifting of profits into low-tax countries. All the G20 states, the US, the UK, China and France, they did support this agreement.
Je salue cette avancée majeure.
I welcome this major progress. It paves the way for the construction of a new international taxation system for the 21st century. As France has been asking for more than 4 years, it's an ambitious agreement, a global and innovative one. It's the most important international tax deal in a century. I will maintain my contact with my European and international counterparts to convince the last hesitating countries, and I'm asking them to do all efforts necessary to join this historic deal, which now very largely gathers together the world's countries.
Now, palm oil, not exactly the most common ingredient in some of our kitchens, at least not in some parts of the world, but you've likely used it before. It's in a wide variety of things that you may use in your home. Lipsticks, soaps, detergents, even ice cream, they all contain some parts of it. And like most commodities at the moment, the price of palm oil is going up. And that's one of the reasons why China has now started trading in palm oil futures. Jiang Shishuan has a story.
Oil from tropical palm trees had long been a key component of most soaps. It's very high in an acid which makes the soap hard and long-lasting. Many manufacturers have recently had to reduce the amount of palm oil in their products, however, because of the bubbles in the price of the raw material.
Since last April, major oil production countries have been hit by COVID-19, and the palm oil price has more than doubled from 4,500 yuan per ton to more than 9,000 yuan per ton this June. The rising prices in packaging and chemical materials have raised our cost by 50%.
The state-owned soap manufacturing giant now uses some 15,000 tons of palm oil in its production lines a year, 30 or 40% of its raw materials. Shanghai Soap has been working to develop new products with new technologies, new ingredients, and new functions, so as to get its profits back.
Our popular products with lower prices have suffered the greatest impact, and that has cut off profits. We have been working on product upgrades for the past 2 years, and they will bring in more revenue. We will be launching cosmetics products this July or August, and we've also adjusted our component proportions based on oil price changes.
But even then, the prices will be going up. Some of the company's new products will be going for as much as 150 yuan, while the traditional line sold more in the 50 yuan range. While the price of vegetable oils witnessed a sudden drop in mid-June when the U.S. Federal Reserve signaled it might increase interest rates sooner than had been expected, experts predict that vegetable oil prices, including those of palm oil, will still keep rising in the long run.
China is a net importer of vegetable oil, so the pricing power is in the hands of the producing countries. For the producers, the vegetable oils only account for 10 or 15% of their profits, while vegetable oil meal for livestock accounts for 70 or 80%, which is more profitable. And oil meal can be stored for only 6 months, while the vegetable oil can be kept for 2 years. So to maximize their profits, they will naturally lower their production of the oils.
So to increase its pricing power in the market, China is working to attract large overseas investors here. China last month started trading of palm oil options on the Dalian Commodity Exchange and allowed overseas investors to participate. The move made palm oil options the first yuan-denominated options contracts listed in China open to overseas investors. The country now is a major palm oil importer, using 15% of the world's total.
Crude oil trading, for example, is monopolized in the world's top trading markets like WTI and NYMEX. Palm oil is a relatively niche market in which there is no large international monopoly. China is almost the largest importer and could form a complete financial trading chain with spot goods, futures, and options. By opening up to overseas investors, it will be able to attract the world's top financial investors and industrial chains.
Yang suggests more helpful currency exchange regulations to make the palm oil exchange operate more smoothly, because there's no question about where the market is going. The price of palm oil options on the Dalian Commodity Exchange more than doubled to 790 yuan per ton today, from the 340 yuan per ton they were bringing when they first began trading just 2 weeks ago. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
On the 1st of July, the EU unveiled its digital COVID certification systems designed to make travel a little easier and safer. The European Union's digital COVID certificate will cover a total of 27 EU member states and 4 non-EU Schengen area countries. The remaining 6 member states are expected to apply for the vaccine passport through the month, as Ryan Thompson now reports from Frankfurt.
From France to Croatia, airports and airlines across Europe are embracing the EU's digital COVID certificate, a unique QR code that allows travelers to prove they're healthy and fit to cross borders.
This certificate is a symbol of an open and digital Europe. We developed this certificate in record time. It will make travel in our union easier, and it will give Europeans back the freedoms they value and cherish so much.
But with vaccinations still in high demand across Europe, the EU is selling the app as a travel pass and not a vaccination passport. You can also get the green light to travel if you've recently tested negative for COVID-19 or have recovered from a positive infection in the past few months.
Previously, even a simple trip to the airport meant carrying pages and pages of documents. A negative PCR test, a travel declaration, and proof that you actually need to travel. But now, with restrictions finally relaxed, all of this goes away.
21 EU countries are issuing the digital COVID pass, and 6 others say they're technically ready but need more time to start using it. Airline groups have criticized those countries for not being ready sooner.
A long time ago, when the DCC proposal was launched in March, they all agreed to the principle and all thought it was a wonderful idea, and it was going to be GDPR compliant. But then when member states need to implement it, you still see that there are, I would not say technical, but apparently in some cases legal barriers. So member states, in some cases, are simply too slow to implement legally to have national legal framework ready.
For now, only those living in the European Union can benefit from the digital COVID pass. But there are ongoing talks with the United Kingdom and United States that may eventually mean mutual recognition and open an even bigger network of international destinations. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
You remember about the Mobile World Congress, right? That big mobile event that usually happens every single year. Of course, the 4-day event was cancelled in 2020. It's the world's biggest trade fair for the mobile telecommunications industry. We're now in day 3 of the 2021 event. But this pandemic has forced many big names like Samsung and Vodafone to stay away. Instead, they chose to showcase the latest products and services virtually. Rahul Pathak has the latest from Madrid on what's hot.
Its last-minute cancellation in 2020, a sign of the growing global threat of COVID-19. Organisers hoping the return this week of the Mobile World Congress to Barcelona could signal a revival for a sector thought to have lost an estimated $42 billion in revenue last year. The MWC, as it's more commonly known, is the world's largest exhibition for the mobile telecommunications industry, with tech companies presenting their latest devices, inventions and discoveries. In his inaugural address, Spain's King Felipe also acknowledging the importance of mobile technology during the worst days of the pandemic.
Therefore, today I would like to acknowledge publicly and applaud and thank the role played by mobile connectivity, not only in the professional sphere, but also in the private sphere, helping and accompanying older people, people in hospital, and those who were alone, keeping them in touch with their families during the lockdown.
This year's scaled-down event was still one of the biggest in-person trade shows to be held since the outbreak of the pandemic. One of the big draws was Chinese mobile phone giant Huawei, as the company looks for a bigger slice of the European market. However, many big names chose not to attend.
Now, while some companies like Vodafone have chosen to opt out of having a physical presence at this year's Mobile World Congress, there has been a greater focus on those startups that are using mobile technology, especially 5G, to produce innovations that in some cases could provide health benefits for millions.
As 5G wireless technology becomes more accessible, its use in areas such as artificial intelligence and healthcare will likely expand. Neuroelectrics is a company based in Barcelona that hopes to revolutionize brain therapy to help treat patients remotely.
So as you can see, I'm going to wear it right now. This is a wireless technology, so it's a cap. These little currents that we can inject from any electrode into the brain have a potential amazing therapeutic effect. We have shown that you can reduce seizures in children that don't respond to medication with epilepsy by injecting these little currents into the brain.
Technology applications in medicine, as in other fields, do hope to be a force for good. If this kind of technology becomes accessible and, more importantly, affordable, then there could be genuinely exciting times ahead. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
All right, in a quick update as far as commodity prices are concerned, Brent crude was just a fraction over $76 a barrel at around 18.26 GMT. It's gone up by at least 47% so far in the year. In fact, it actually did come up in the course of the White House briefing a little earlier today. The White House spokesperson Jen Psaki saying, yes, the administration is concerned about high gasoline prices, but it is confident, however, that there's plenty of spare production capacity around the world to provide the extra oil output that may be required by the market. Of course, the OPEC Plus meeting and the voting around that is still going on. We'll keep you updated on what comes out of that as soon as we get it. Now, ever since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in Tunisia, the restaurant industry has been facing many challenges. One young entrepreneur there is trying to keep open a cafe dedicated only to women. It allows women to meet, work, study and enjoy themselves in a safe space. Adam Chwachi has that story on Grassroots.
The Tunisian government imposed a curfew from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. throughout the country. Cafes will remain open until 4 p.m. with a 50% capacity in open areas. However, all chairs will be removed. In addition, shisha pipes were banned in all coffee shops.
The authorities are imposing new restrictions on cafes to limit the spread of the virus. Did anyone think of our situation? We are in a deep crisis. More than 80% of cafe employees lost their jobs, and thousands of cafes shut down due to the lockdowns.
A few months before the outbreak of the pandemic, 27-year-old Amirat Lili opened a cafe for women in the capital city Tunis.
I studied fashion design, then changed my career path and opened this cafe for women in this popular neighborhood, where women and girls have nowhere to go. I started the business 2 years ago. The pandemic hit the country just months after I had inaugurated the coffee shop. It was hard for the business to survive, but I did it for all my female clients.
Amira's clients are students, housewives, engineers, job seekers, and women from all backgrounds.
I understood from my personal experience that it is impossible for a woman or a girl to find a quiet place to study or discuss without being interrupted by men. Here, women do not have to worry about the security or privacy. My clients act as if they were at home.
The coffee shop owner now dreams of opening a space for women in another city that have no place to go. Amira's Only Women Cafe is viewed by residents of the capital city Tunis as one of their favorite spots. It is also a space for culture, education and fun. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And we'll leave it there for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. Many ways to get your feedback back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The world today's up next from Washington, D.C.